Hello guys, this is your friend ITACHI Fanfic 3.0 and we are back a new fanfic story which is what if Naruto stepped away so humanity could learn balance without depending on him? Part 1. Let's start fanfic without wasting more time. No one remembered the exact moment when the boy stopped being only a boy. Some said it happened the night the sky forgot how to sleep. Others believed it was much earlier, back when hope first learned to hurt. But the truth was quieter, heavier, and far more patient than any legend dared to admit. He stood alone at the center of his own existence, wearing a cloak darker than memory, its red clouds not symbols of rebellion but scars of understanding. His blonde hair, once wild and careless, now framed a face that carried neither anger nor joy, only awareness. Behind him, a pale circular mark hovered, not glowing, not burning, simply present, like a thought the universe itself could not forget. From his shoulders extended many arms, each one calm, each one purposeful. They were not weapons. They were not illusions. They were choices made real. This was Naruto Uzumaki. Not the hero they praised. Not the demon they feared. But the consequence of everything they had ever believed. Long ago, before the world learned his name properly, Naruto learned something far more dangerous than any jutsu. He learned silence. As a child, noise had followed him everywhere. Whispers, insults, laughter sharpened into blades. He responded the only way he knew how, by being louder. Louder smiles. Louder promises. Louder dreams. He believed that if he shouted his heart into the world, someone would finally hear it beating. But time is cruel to loud children. Promises broke. Mentors died. Friends bled. Enemies returned stronger, smarter, more certain than before. Every victory demanded a price, and every price demanded another piece of his innocence. So Naruto learned silence. Silence taught him things shouting never could. In silence, he noticed how villages spoke of peace while preparing for war. In silence, he saw how heroes were celebrated only when they were useful. In silence, he realized that the cycle of hatred did not spin on hatred alone, but on hope that refused to question itself. He did not turn away from the world. He turned into it. Naruto began listening. Not just to people, but to intentions. To fear hiding beneath loyalty. To love hiding beneath cruelty. To desperation disguising itself as justice. And slowly, something inside him unfolded. The many arms did not appear overnight. They emerged one by one, each born from a decision Naruto was forced to make when no right answer existed. One arm formed the night he chose to forgive an enemy who never apologized. Another formed when he killed someone who could have been saved, but only at the cost of thousands. Another formed when he realized that mercy without wisdom was just another form of violence. Each arm represented a path he had walked, a burden he refused to abandon. The world did not notice at first. Why would it? Naruto still smiled, still spoke of peace, still protected the weak. But his smile had changed. It no longer asked for acceptance. It no longer begged for recognition. It simply existed. And existence, when unafraid, terrifies those built on control. The great nations began to sense it, the imbalance. Not in chakra, but in meaning. Naruto no longer fit into their stories. He was no longer the weapon they could point, nor the hero they could parade. He had become something worse. He had become independent. Whispers spread quietly. Not of rebellion, but of inevitability. Some shinobi claimed they felt calmer around him, as if conflict forgot how to breathe. Others claimed their ambitions weakened in his presence, like lies exposed to daylight. Leaders feared him not because he threatened war, but because he made war feel unnecessary. And unnecessary things are dangerous to those who profit from them. Naruto understood this before they ever confronted him. He understood that peace imposed from above would always rot. He understood that villages united by fear would eventually turn on one another again. He understood that saving the world once was easy. Saving it from itself was the real battle. So he stepped away. Not as an exile. Not as a criminal. But as a witness. He traveled without announcing himself. Not hiding. Simply uninterested in being followed. Wherever he went, conflicts softened. Not ended. Softened. Like fists unclenching mid-strike. Like grudges hesitating before becoming bloodshed. People spoke to him without realizing who he was. They confessed regrets, doubts, dreams they had buried under duty. Naruto listened. Not to judge, not to fix, but to understand. Understanding became his greatest power. The circular mark behind him, some called it a halo, others a seal, was neither. It was alignment, a symbol of a mind that had accepted contradiction without breaking. Naruto had learned the truth no one wanted to hear. The world did not need a savior. It needed a mirror. And he was willing to be hated for holding it up. When the Akatsuki cloak returned to his shoulders, it was not an act of rebellion. It was irony. A reminder that symbols only mean what people are afraid they mean. The red clouds were no longer storms. They were warnings. Warnings that Naruto would no longer play the role assigned to him. Warnings that the age of blind faith was ending. Warnings that power without reflection would soon find itself obsolete. Some former allies called him lost. Some enemies called him divine. Naruto called himself neither. I am still learning, he said once, quietly, to no one in particular. But learning had changed him beyond recognition. He no longer fought to win. He fought to reveal. Every clash exposed motives. Every defeat taught a lesson deeper than victory ever could. Those who faced him described the same thing afterward, if they survived. It felt like fighting themselves. The many arms moved calmly, each responding to a different truth. One defended. One restrained. One dismantled techniques before they were even completed. One rested. Always resting. Reminding Naruto that restraint was as important as action. He could end wars. He chose not to. Because endings imposed from force only restart later. Instead, Naruto waited. He waited for the world to ask the right question. And somewhere deep within him, the final transformation had not yet completed. The arms were not finished forming. The circle behind him was not yet closed. Part of Naruto still believed the world could choose differently on its own. That belief was fragile. And fragile beliefs, when broken, reshape everything. This was not the story of a villain rising. This was not the story of a god descending. This was the story of a boy who understood humanity too well, and had not yet decided whether it deserved saving again. Naruto did not leave the villages because he hated them. He left because he finally understood them. Understanding is heavier than anger. Anger burns and fades, but understanding settles inside the chest and refuses to move. Naruto carried that weight everywhere, and with each step, it shaped him further. As time passed, people began to notice something unsettling. Not what Naruto did, but what he did not do. He did not interfere when conflicts were small. He did not offer advice unless asked. He did not correct lies unless they were believed by too many. This restraint confused everyone who encountered him. The old Naruto would have rushed forward, shouting promises, forcing belief through sheer will. This Naruto watched, listened, and waited until words were no longer enough. And when he finally spoke, his words did not inspire. They unsettled. Because he never told people what they wanted to hear. He told them what they were avoiding. To a village elder obsessed with security, Naruto spoke of fear disguised as wisdom. To a shinobi obsessed with revenge, he spoke of grief pretending to be purpose. To a child dreaming of heroism, he spoke of loneliness that followed applause. No accusations. No condemnation. Just truth. The many arms behind him grew more defined with time, though most could not see them clearly. Some sensed them only as pressure, like standing beneath a vast sky that reminded you how small certainty really was. Each arm carried a different patience. One arm represented forgiveness that no longer required reconciliation. One arm represented strength that refused to dominate. One arm represented violence remembered but not celebrated. One arm represented hope stripped of fantasy. Naruto was no longer driven by ideals. He was guided by consequences. That frightened people far more than ideals ever could. Because ideals can be debated, reshaped, or ignored. Consequences cannot. Some shinobi tried to challenge him, not out of hatred, but out of desperation. They wanted to test whether the legend was still human. Whether he could still bleed. Whether the world still made sense around him. Naruto never refused these challenges. But he never enjoyed them either. Those who fought him realized something disturbing. Naruto was not trying to win. He was trying to teach. Every movement was deliberate, every response measured, every counter restrained just enough to leave space for realization. Fighters left with broken pride, not broken bodies. And broken pride lingers longer. The circular mark behind Naruto slowly changed, not in shape, but in meaning. It no longer felt like alignment alone. It felt like completion approaching. As if something ancient was watching, waiting to see whether Naruto would cross a final invisible threshold. Naruto himself felt it. There were nights, quiet, endless nights, where he wondered whether detachment was just another form of escape. Whether understanding everything meant belonging nowhere. Whether becoming a mirror meant losing the right to be reflected in return. He remembered laughter. He remembered bonds that did not require explanation. And for the first time since childhood, Naruto questioned whether peace demanded solitude, or whether he had chosen solitude because peace hurt too much to share. That doubt created another arm. This one did not move. It simply rested. A reminder that even growth could become stagnation if never challenged. Far away, the great nations finally began to speak openly, not about Naruto's power, but about his absence. Missions failed without explanation. Alliances felt fragile without obvious enemies. Leaders realized something terrifying. Without Naruto's presence as a stabilizing force, their own flaws became visible. They missed him. Not the boy. The balance. But balance without consent is just control disguised as safety. Naruto knew the moment the world would come looking for him was approaching. He felt it not as danger, but as inevitability. When systems fail quietly, they always seek something, or someone, to blame. And Naruto was convenient. Yet he did not prepare defenses. He did not gather allies. He did not hide. Because running would confirm their fear. Instead, he remained exactly where he was, between paths, between roles, between definitions. Still learning. Still waiting. The greatest irony was this. Naruto had become powerful enough to reshape the world completely. And wise enough to fear doing so. Part of him still hoped humanity would choose reflection over repetition. But hope, like silence, cannot last forever. And when it finally breaks, it does not whisper. Time moved differently around Naruto now. Days passed without leaving marks. Weeks folded into one another like unfinished thoughts. The world continued its routines, missions assigned, borders guarded, treaties signed. But beneath it all, something strained, like a structure pretending not to crack. Naruto felt it long before anyone named it. He felt it in the way people hesitated before making decisions. He felt it in the way conflicts paused, waiting for permission to become violent again. He felt it in the way his name was no longer spoken with certainty, only with calculation. He had become a variable. And systems hate variables. Naruto remembered a time when he wanted nothing more than to be acknowledged. To be seen. To be called necessary. Now that necessity surrounded him like an unspoken law, he realized how fragile acknowledgement truly was. People did not want him back. They wanted the idea of him. Controlled, predictable, obedient to their definitions of good. But Naruto was no longer an idea. He was a question with no comfortable answer. The many arms shifted subtly as his understanding deepened. They were not static. They changed with him, responding to thoughts he never voiced. Some arms began to withdraw, folding inward, as if their lessons had been learned. Others became more pronounced, heavier, as if reminding him that certain truths could never be unlearned. One arm carried memory, not nostalgia. Memory without softness. It remembered every compromise he had accepted for peace. Every time he allowed injustice to survive because confronting it would have caused chaos. Every time he chose the lesser evil and told himself it was enough. Another arm carried responsibility. Not the kind assigned by titles or expectations, but the kind that arises when you know you could stop something, and choose not to. That arm weighed the most. Naruto often wondered whether restraint was wisdom or fear dressed in patience. He examined his own stillness the way he once examined enemy techniques, looking for flaws, for hidden intentions. And sometimes, he found them. There were moments, rare but sharp, when he felt the urge to act decisively. To dismantle the systems that recycled suffering. To expose leaders who fed on endless conflict. To end wars not by persuasion, but by inevitability. He knew he could. That knowledge frightened him more than any enemy ever had. Because power without limits does not corrupt instantly. It convinces. Naruto had seen enough villains to recognize the pattern. They always began with reasons. With logic. With righteousness. With certainty that they were the exception. He refused to become an exception. So he continued to wait. But waiting is not neutral. The world interpreted it as defiance. Rumors hardened into narratives. Narratives became policies. Policies became quiet preparations. Shinobi were trained not to fight Naruto, but to resist what he represented. Autonomy. Truth without allegiance. A mirror no one controlled. Naruto sensed observers watching from distances too careful to reveal fear. He allowed them. Not out of arrogance, but out of understanding. If the world needed to study him before choosing, then study was better than violence. Yet each act of surveillance added another layer of distance. Loneliness returned. Not as pain, but as clarity. For the first time, Naruto fully accepted that the bonds he once treasured could not exist in the same way again. Equality had vanished the moment he outgrew the world's frameworks. Friendship required shared limits, and Naruto no longer lived within them. Acceptance formed another arm. This one did not reach outward. It rested against his chest. He thought often about legacy, not in terms of monuments or stories, but consequences. What would remain if he disappeared entirely? Would the world collapse into chaos? Or would it finally learn to balance itself without leaning on a single pillar? The answer disturbed him. The world would struggle, but it would adapt. And that realization both relieved and saddened him. Naruto was not indispensable. He was transitional. A bridge is not meant to be lived on forever. Still, bridges feel every footstep. When the first official message finally reached him, it did not demand surrender. It did not threaten. It did not accuse. It asked. Not sincerely, but carefully. They asked him to return. To advise. To stabilize. To reassure. Naruto read the message slowly, not for its words, but for its omissions. No acknowledgement of mistakes. No admission of dependence. No promise of